What's going on right now? What's the big argument in the United States? Socially, what's the hell's going on? Anything important? Nothing?
Always something to do with Trump.
I'm sorry?
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump? Well, what about Donald Trump? What's going on? See, it's snowing right
The wall and the shutdown.
Junk food.
The wall of the shutdown.
Junk food.
Junk food, yeah. Well, he fed all those Clemson ball players. Now they'll probably all have heart attacks.
They ate it all too.
They did. So the shutdown is huge. Does anybody know Marius Begay? Marius? You know Marius, yeah. His wife has been furloughed. So the shutdown is real important to him because his paycheck is the only one they're getting. Whereas before she was actually making more money than he was. Not anymore. She's furloughed. So does anybody else have a relative or somebody you know that is suffering because of the shutdown?
But just kidding.
Yeah. So, I mean, if it doesn't impact you, I guess it's not that big a deal. My wife's retired military, so she's supposed to get her check. She hasn't, well, we have to wait until February to find out if she actually gets her check. The other question was, what about taxes? We have to pay our taxes. We can pay our taxes now since it's the beginning of the year. So the IRS is closed now.
When did they close?
They closed with the shutdown.
I thought they were last hour.
There are some people that are there. The people that are there theoretically are the ones that are going to give you your tax refund, which is kind of exciting. Okay, so that's the issue that's going on right now. This is the longest shutdown we've ever seen. So this is huge. This is gigantic. 800,000 people are not getting paychecks who got paychecks before. Most of them work for the Fed. Well, they all get their money from the federal government one way or the other. So this is gigantic. So what does that have to do with social psychology? Well, the answer is it has everything to do with social psychology because that's what we study. Social psychology studies these issues. So what's the other issue? What's on the other side? We've got the shutdown over here. Why is there a shutdown?
The wall.
The wall. So Trump wants a wall, the Democrats won't give it to him. Congress is split now. Congress, before the last election, before the 2018 election, Congress, the House was controlled by the Republicans. Paul Ryan was the Speaker of the House. Now the Democrats are in charge. They have a 40-person majority in the House. A little bit different than it was before. The Republicans had a 23 person majority, and now they don't. Now now the Democrats control Congress. So who controls the money?
Congress also.
Congress does, but which branch of Congress? Which house? Is it the House of Representatives or the Senate that controls the money? This is civics class.
Well, doesn't it have to start at the House of Representatives?
Yeah.
And then it goes on to the Senate?
Exactly. And then the Senate has to approve it. They have to pass it and approve it. Am I kicking you out? Am I losing you?
I'm not in this class.
You can stay. We're talking
until 10:30.
Oh, okay. You're early. Okay, there we go. That's funny. Okay, where am I? Social psychology. Okay, so that's what's going on. If we look at social psychology, we can see crises that have been happening throughout the ages, and that's why social psychology is so important. What's going to happen next? Nobody can rule unless they have support from the people that they rule, hopefully, or theoretically. I guess that's the way it works. So if we look at social psychology, that's what we're talking about. We're looking at all of these controversies that have been going on. We've got one right now. So what's the wall have to do with anything? What is the real argument? The wall is a solution for a problem. What is the problem?
Keeping illegal immigrants out of the country.
Keeping illegal immigrants out of the country. But that's not all, is it?
Drugs.
Drugs, right.
Human trafficking.
Human trafficking. Human trafficking, that seems a little odd.
That's real big here lately on the reservation.
Yeah.
Missing, murdered Native women.
But not just here on this reservation, is it?
Canada as well.
Yeah, all over Indian country. This seems to be a really serious problem. If we look at what's going on in Canada, maybe I shouldn't pick on the Canadians.
But I think that the reason why he's actually doing it is just to make it's pretty much just leaving something for history to say, yeah, Donald Trump was the one who built that wall.
I guess that's one way to look at it. Yeah, that's Trump's wall, like the wall of Great Wall of China,
Yeah, exactly.
Hadrian's Wall.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess
Or
that's
failed to build a wall.
right. And he said he was going to build a wall.
I don't even think he really wants a wall.
I don't
I think he's
know.
just doing that to keep his base so he can get reelected. There's already a wall.
There seems to be one where we need one. Other presidents have built sections of wall. San Diego, there's a wall. El Paso, there's a wall.
Dallas.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just all over. Yeah, Nogales, exactly, way down. You guys have sections of wall. And it's normally where they normally come across. People don't come across any place else because they get lost in the desert. Then they got a problem. Then they die. Okay, so that's what social psychology is all about. It's all about these arguments about what's going on in society. Most of you are too young to remember, but at one time we were arguing about who should be able to marry one another. And one side said it has to be between a man and a woman. The other side said, who cares who gets married? And eventually, of course, the one side won eventually. But it changed elections. They ran on a platform that marriage should be between a man and a woman, and they tried to pass that through Congress. Of course, it never worked. And now, of course, we have different laws in the United States that says anybody can get married, as long as they're human, I guess. I don't know if you can marry animals. I'm not sure about that. I don't know. Who wants to marry a dog?
Now
Wait a minute, that guy in Japan married an anime character. He married a hologram.
Now everybody's entitled to being miserable.
There you go. Everybody gets to be miserable, not just males and females who want to marry one another. Okay, I guess that makes sense. Elections have been turned on the question of abortion. It's been turned on gay rights. It's been turned on a lot of different things through the years. In the 1920s, one of the strongest organizations in the United States was the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s. Yesterday in Congress, they didn't censure him. They condemned his words. They condemned a guy from Iowa,
King.
Stephen King, exactly. He's from Iowa. He's from where I live right now. He lives on the other side of the state, but he still lives he's still from Iowa. And everybody's pissed off about him because he keeps talking about white supremacy. Now, once upon a time, you would never have anybody condemn anybody because they talked about white supremacy. Well, in the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan was the most powerful political organization in the United States. Let me do this. Anyway, so that's what social psychology is all about. This is the stuff that we're studying. We're studying, and right now we would be studying the wall. We would be studying the shutdown. We would be we should be studying the argument going on between the more conservative people in the United States and the more liberal people in the United States. All this is really important stuff. Let me see. Okay. So that's what social psychology is all about. We're always studying the most important thing. And of course the question has to be, what is the most important issue of today? And at the same time, what's going on in the world of entertainment, I guess. Once upon a time, television ruled the roost. Before that, movies ruled society. They told you what clothes to wear, how to comb your hair, how to dance.
Can you do it again?
No, I can't. My son does. My grandson does this. I haven't quite figured that one out yet. I can't even remember what he calls it. Anyway, he just goes to
It's
town.
called flossing.
What is it?
Flossing.
Flossing. That's right, flossing. And he does the dap. Right?
No,
He does.
not holding the gun. No.
No, it's like this.
You're supposed. I think you're supposed to
Put
put
your
it
head
the other
Your
down.
head down.
Yeah.
I know.
There should be your picture on the website.
So they tell you how to dance. We used to watch, what was that television show that taught us how to dance? Soul Train, exactly. Well, maybe. Or American Bandstand. That was way, way before anybody's time in here. That's how we learned how to dress. That's how we learned how to act. That's how we learned how to comb our hairs and get our flat top. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, it's okay. All right. Get our flat top or our ducktail or whatever. That's how we learned how to be people in the United States, and this was all very important. If you watch a movie from the 1950s, the difference between men in the 1950s and men today, they always wore hats. They always wore a hat. It wasn't a baseball cap. It was a fedora. It was one of those hats, and everybody wore one, and you always wore one. So if you're watching a movie from the 1950s, the guy's always forgetting his hat. He's always laying it down. He can't remember where he put it. But he can't leave the apartment without his hat on his head, as odd as that seems. So you can't go outside without a hat. That's the way it was. And women couldn't go outside without gloves. This is the 1950s. So how did people know to do that? Well, they knew to do that because they watched the movies. Or whatever, or television. And then television came in, and everybody smoked. Everybody used to smoke. Oh, God, it was horrible. So you'd go into somebody's house and they'd have an ashtray, and it would be full of cigarette butt. I know, it was nasty.
You can see people smoking in hospitals and on airplanes and all movies.
Everywhere.
On schools. The teacher of the break room. It's like,
When I was in college, the professors used to smoke, but they smoked pipes because that made them look smart. But I had a professor that he couldn't keep a pipe going. You have to puff on him a lot to keep him going. And he couldn't do that, so he started smoking cigars. Well, he couldn't even keep a cigar going. So then he started smoking cigarettes. And you never thought about it. I mean, it stunk. I mean, it really did. But no, every place smelled like cigarettes. I went into Dr. Garrity's office yesterday, and I was thinking, geez, this place smells like tobacco, like smoke. Well, Dr. Garrity doesn't smoke. It's whoever was in there before stunk that room up. And she's been in there for, I don't know, 2 years, I guess, but whoever was in there before smoked. And you can still smell it. We don't smell tobacco anymore. In the old days, tobacco was everywhere. Everybody, well, not everybody. A lot of people smoked. My family didn't smoke, but other people's family smoked. And then what happened if you smoked all your life?
cancer.
Cancer, yeah, you died of lung cancer or emphysema. Usually you didn't make it to emphysema. You usually died of lung cancer in your 50s. Yeah, I know. It's kind of tragic. Anyway, okay. So that's what social psychology is all about. We're going to talk about the history of social psychology if I can never get started. Yes, sir. Oh, I thought you would have raised your hand.
no.
I'm sorry. Let me tell you a quick story. This is Fiorina and Todd. As you can see, Fiorina and Todd, they've been married for 3 years. Last Thursday, Fiorina got a really mean tone in her voice and shrewishly said to Todd, "Can't you ever put the cap back on the toothpaste?" How many people think that a cap on the toothpaste is the most important issue that you can possibly bring up in a marriage? What's the number one argument between husbands and wives?
Finances.
Finances, exactly. And number two is
Children.
Facebook, probably.
You're always on
I
Facebook.
don't know. Maybe. No, it has to do with sex. Okay.
Trash.
Trash.
Take out the
Who
trash.
takes out the trash? Who puts the cap back on the toothpaste? Does anybody not put the cap back on the toothpaste? Well, it used to be an issue. So they got into an argument about the toothpaste. Todd assumed that Fiorina must have had a bad drive home from work. The problem was external. Didn't have to do with her. She's not really shrewish. She's not really mean. It's an external problem. Something caused her to have this problem. Does that make sense? Normally, she doesn't even talk about the toothpaste. Today, it's the most important thing in the whole wide world. But then again, she had a bad drive home and somebody pissed her off. Or maybe she pissed somebody else off, then they gave her the finger or something. They did something. In Germany, they go like this or like this, telling you you're crazy if you do something in traffic. Or they call you interesting names. But it's in German, so you don't know what they're saying.
How do they do it here?
Oh, do they give people here? They give you the finger.
How do they do it?
Yes. I don't know. I've never had anybody
This
mad.
finger?
They give you the thumb. Good job. Fitch and Bodie fought before they were married and had been unhappily sparring through the 3 years of marriage. One day, Fitch said to Bodie, "Can't you ever stop? Can't you ever put the top back on the toothpaste?" Bodie thought to himself as he put the top back on the toothpaste, what is the word for someone who is unpleasant and always hostile? Oh yeah, Fitch. She's a real Fitch. Later at dinner, Fitch asked Bodie if the dinner was okay. He blew up anticipating a fight because he felt that her problem was internal, not external. And this is one of the other issues that we study in social psychology. Is it an external problem or an internal problem? A lot of the arguments in the United States right now, the arguments before the last election, not the last election, but the one before that, the 2016 election, a lot of it was internal. A lot of this stuff is people just hated Hillary Clinton, and it was an internal thing. And you couldn't convince them that she wasn't going to do something horrible. They just hated her. They didn't like her. She was probably the wrong person to run for president. It was an internal thing. And there were a lot of people out there that didn't like Hillary Clinton because of what she tried to do with health care. None of you guys remember this, but in 1992, when Bill Clinton was elected president, he put his wife in charge of national health care, a national health care program. And she came up with a plan, and everybody went, "Oh my God, this lady's a lunatic." This is in 1992. It was before women became that important in politics. And because of that, there were a lot of people that hated Hillary Clinton in the United States. I can remember seeing stickers when I was up in Montana in the early 2000s when George Bush was the president. Anybody but Hillary, that's what it said. Anybody but Hillary. That's interesting. Putin, maybe. No, wait a minute. He's a Russian. We can't have him. Okay, anyway. Social psychology is a scientific study of how people think about, influence, and relate to one another. That's what we're doing in social psychology. We're trying to figure out why this is going on. There seems to be a lot of conflict in the United States, and a lot of it has to do, are we really arguing about immigration? Is that really what the issue is?
No.
It seems to be a conservative liberal thing. And in the last election, of course, the people with liberal ideas seem to have taken over politics to some extent. Iowa, where I live now, half of their members of House of Representatives were Democrats and half of them were Republican. The right side of the state, the western part of the state was conservative. The left, the people, actually it's the people on the east, they were liberal. They elected Democrats. And in this last election, only one Republican won. The rest of all the representatives in Iowa are Democrats. And one of them was 23 years old. She's a kid. She just graduated from college, and she was elected to Congress. The only Republican that won was Stephen King. And he won in it was not really a runoff election, but he didn't win on the night of the election. They had to have a recount. in order to determine that he won, and he only won by 2,500 votes, which isn't very many. Now the interesting thing is that what is it about Stephen King? Why is everybody so pissed off about it?
He was talking about nationalism.
Nationalism. So he keeps talking about, he doesn't really talk about Ku Klux Klan. He talks about white supremacy and white nationalism. It's really strong up there in that corner of Iowa. It's over by Sioux City. Does anybody know anything about Iowa? There's two reservations over there. One's on the Nebraska side, the other's on the Iowa side. The Winnebago, the Ho-Chunk are over there. There's a Dakota Sioux reservation over there. Oto and Omaha group over there. So there's a little bit of racism going on. It doesn't have anything to do with African Americans because there aren't any over there. But it has to do with American Indians. And that's the base that he's trying to play to, that he has been playing to for, golly, he's been in Congress for what, 23 years or something. But he's the only Republican that won, and he just barely won. And normally he wins by a landslide. That corner of Iowa is very, very conservative. Why are we talking about this? Well, anyway, social psychology studies how we as individuals are influenced by others. And of course, that's what happened in the 2016 election. A lot of people were on Facebook. There was all this stuff that attacking Hillary Clinton. There was stuff. There was one advertisement, it turned out to come from the Russians, that said Satan wants Hillary Clinton to win, which was kind of interesting. Never talked to Satan, but evidently somebody in Russia did, and they found out that Hillary Clinton and Satan wanted Hillary Clinton to win. No, it said if Hillary wins, Satan wins. That's what it said. Social psychology was defined by this individual. This is Gordon Allport. He and his brother put this together. And we're going to talk about his brother in just a second. But Gordon Allport lived longer than his brother. His brother did a little bit more to expand social psychology, but the two of them, these two brothers, put together social psychology. And this was really quite important at the time. There wasn't a social psychology before this. And the two of them said, look, we need to understand how people are getting along in society. We need to understand how the individual is functioning in society and what influences them. This was very important in the 1920s and 1930s. In the 1920s, we had the Great Depression. In the 1930s, they elected Franklin Delano Roosevelt as the President of the United States. And Roosevelt wanted to put together programs so that he could put people back to work. He put together the WPA, the CCC. He put together a lot of different organizations. And there were people in the United States, very relatively conservative people in the United States, who said, you can't do this, that's communism. So there was this argument as to whether it was communism or whether it wasn't. And this became extremely important. Now we don't even think about it. We don't even argue about it. We may not even know about it. How important was FDR for the recovery of the United States? Would we have been prepared for World War II if we hadn't done any of these things? He was trying to put people back to work. He was trying to feed people. People were starving to death. A quarter of the people in the United States were out of work.
Are you talking about the New Deal?
Yeah, I'm talking about the New Deal, exactly. So this is really important stuff. And there wasn't anybody that was even thinking in this direction. Everybody was thinking, we have to be Freudian, we have to do psychoanalysis on these people. I think this is the most important thing in the whole wide world, that we deal with the individual. We deal with the individual, not whether we can put you back. That's not important. We need to deal with just the individual. And Allport said, no. We've got all kinds of crazy stuff happening all over the world. We just fought World War I for no reason at all. These guys these countries just decided that they would start shooting each other, and they did. They just couldn't get along. So we can't let that happen again. 10 million men died in World War I. 11 million people died of the Spanish flu afterwards. So there's 21 million people in the world that were no longer there just because people couldn't get along. as strange as that may seem. So they decided that they needed to put this whole, we needed to start studying this stuff. We needed to start studying why people react to the issues of the day. You guys are all too young, but at one time people would buy pet rocks. Why the hell would you ever buy a rock and keep it in your pocket as your pet, or put it on your desk, and this is my pet rock? Really? A pet rock? Are you kidding me? But people did this in the millions. In Japan, it's so crowded in Japan that people can't afford pets. They don't have dogs, they don't have cats. So they invented an electronic pet that you had to feed. It was called a Yamaguchi. It was made by a guy named Yamaguchi. And you had to feed it, and you had to pay attention to it. And if you didn't, it died. So you're this thing that you kept in your pocket. So you'd have to take it out every once in a while and pet this electronic. I know, how silly is that? But this is what people were doing. And so these are all very important things. We need to understand why people are doing what they're doing. Why are women getting so much plastic surgery? Why are men starting to get plastic surgery? All this stuff is really important, or can be important. And it can have to do with death. Why are there so many people that are overdosing on opiates? What the hell's going on? What is it about opiates? And before opiates, it was crystal meth. And before that, it was Valium. It was barbiturates. What's going on? Why do people need to feel like they don't that they're living someplace else, or that they're not living in reality? Why do people get drunk? What's the major reason that people get drunk? Escapism. Yeah, exactly. And that's probably what's going on here with all of this stuff. But people are dying because of fentanyl. Fentanyl, that's how you pronounce it. Okay. Okay, so Gordon Allport and his brother were the two people that established social psychology because they felt it was important. We had all these individuals that were trying to cure people one at a time. Well, these guys decided we needed to cure society. We need to look at society and why society does stuff. So this is what they were looking at. Thoughts are affected by actual presence of others. So it's the fact that you're around other individuals. It makes you do what you do. And as we said last time, if you're in a different environment, you probably act differently. You may have a completely different personality at home than you have here in the classroom. Here you're quiet, and at home maybe you're just loud and boisterous and play a lot of video games or whatever. I don't know. In class, I don't see anybody checking their phone, but when you're outside, not here, you may check your phone like every 15 seconds, like it's really important that you get that text message from your friend over. I don't know why people do that. Like I said last time, can't even get a text message, so I don't know. But people are affected by the presence of others. Feelings are affected by imagined presence of others. And you see this in movies, and if you talk to people, they'll say, well, I didn't do that because I didn't want to embarrass my parents. So despite the fact that their parents weren't there, they didn't do something that they shouldn't have done because they didn't want to embarrass their parents. And maybe their parents aren't even alive anymore. So what difference should it make if you do something? Your parents are gone. They're never going to know, theoretically. Behavior is affected by the implied presence of others. And of course, sometimes you do things because you can imagine that this is how this person feels. I have a brother, I have 3 brothers and 2 sisters. And I have a brother that's very conservative. I'm not. As a matter of fact, he's the only conservative member of the family, except for my dad. Or at least my dad was a Republican. And my dad stopped voting Republican because of Ronald Reagan, but we won't go into that. So my brother's conservative because he imagines that this is what my dad would do. It's my baby brother. So he's very conservative. He carries 2 guns with him all the time, one on each hip, but they're back here. He has to take them out to sit in his car, to drive in his car. But he lives in South Carolina, where it's kind of a dangerous place. He's a very conservative person. He argued that Trump should be president of the United States because we need a strong leader. That's what he said. We need a strong leader. So he's very conservative. And when he talks about his ideas, he talks about my dad. Well, my dad's been dead since, I don't know, 2005, I think. So my dad's been gone for a long time, but he's still trying to impress my father, despite the fact my father is no longer around. So he is conservative because of my dad, and he talks about my dad. My liberalism has nothing to do with my mother. My mother was a Democrat. My dad was a Republican.
Would you say that's something along the same lines as like people who try to honor their ancestors by carrying on a way of life?
I would say that's different because you're trying to live your life, every aspect of your life, the way that your parents would want you to. But his ideas are just political. They're just social. It's not like, he doesn't eat bacon and eggs for breakfast like my dad used to.
Oh, I mean,
Talking
like,
to my father.
as far as the main idea.
I don't know, I think, maybe. That fits, it fits.
The other one made me think about too, about the presence of others, and like when people can talk, but then if you put them up in front of a large group of people,
They can't,
it can really affect.
the way that they react, exactly. That's a good point. You know, I can talk to you guys, I have no problem at all talking to students. When I get in front of my colleagues, I go, I can barely talk. I hem and haw, and I can't say anything. Unless I focus on one person and just talk to that one person, I can do that. But if I've got everybody out there, and I know I have haters out there. I'm assuming I don't have any haters in here, and it wouldn't make any difference. You're students, so you can't do anything to me. But I have haters among the faculty. So I know what they're thinking. So I try to control what I say. Okay. What is the difference between social psychology and sociology? It's 2 different fields. And when social psychology started, they said, we don't need this. We don't need social psychology. We have sociology. We can study sociology. We don't need to study psychology. But the reality is that social psychology is different from sociology. Both fields are interested in social behavior. That is true. But psychology focuses on the individual level of variables. Why did that person do it? And I was talking about this last time. We were talking about the Pollard in Las Vegas. Why did he do that? Well, that's a social psychology question. We need to find out why he did this. Sociology would say, well, why are there mass shootings in the United States? But social psychology would say, what the hell's going on with this guy? What mechanisms caused him to want to shoot that place up? To shoot up a concert, why would you do that? The interesting thing was that he had gone to a rock and roll concert in Massachusetts. They thought, and he scoped that one out, but the concert that he shot up was a country and western. So it didn't have anything to do with the music. And that they know that it didn't have anything to do with the music. And we're still confused. This is very confusing. Why did he do it? Why did this man do that? When we talk, I'm
So
sorry.
you're saying, like, why did he do it to this group of people? Are they trying to find out why? So it's not country music? Why?
He didn't hate country music. He hated all music. Evidently, he didn't like people very much.
Okay.
I'm thinking, well, this guy was pretty much an iconoclast. He stayed to himself. He wore sweatpants. I hope nobody has sweatpants on. Okay. He wore sweatpants all the time, and he walked around in flip-flops. This is in Las Vegas. And, he looked like a bum, I guess. I don't know. He looked like a guy with flip-flops that always wore sweatpants. He was kind of dumpy. Does that have something to do with it? We don't know. See, we're trying to figure out what the trigger was. We don't want this to happen again. We want to know who this guy is, so the next time we can stop him before he does this. So I would imagine that the casinos in Las Vegas will start looking at people's luggage, or at least trying to identify people's luggage. This guy carried, what, 12 rifles, automatic weapons up to his room with 18,000 rounds of ammunition. That's a lot of, that's heavy stuff. And evidently he transported it by himself. So, and I'm not I've never been to Las Vegas, so, well, I've been through there, but I've never really been to Las Vegas. So I don't know, do people cart, I don't know what they take upstairs. I have no idea. You know, what happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. So I don't know, are they taking their favorite sheep up there or something and having orgies? I don't know. Just a strange thought. Oh, I was sex with a sheep. So psychology looks at things from the individual point of view, the thought processes that take place, what was going on with in Pollard's head, emotional reactions. Why did he react so angrily to whatever? What was the trigger? And behavioral tendencies. And in this case, he had never been a gun advocate until like 18 months before he decided to shoot the place up. So what they're thinking is when he bought his first gun, when he started accumulating weapons and ammunition, he was making plans to shoot the place up, to shoot something up. He was planning on attacking. So we have to look at their behavioral tendencies. One of the oddities of the Pollard shooting was that Pollard was 63 years old. The fact that he was a white male, that's almost all the mass shootings are white males, for some reason. There's something wrong with white guys. But it was kind of nice because it was always younger white guys. I passed that threshold, I don't know, 20 years ago where I would shoot someplace up. But now we've got Pollard, he's 63, I'm 69. Am I going to go off the deep end and start accumulating weapons and ammunition and shoot someplace up? Go to the gas station? Oh, wait a minute, there's a IHS hospital over. I know. I mean, I'm the most dangerous guy on this reservation right now. No, I've got a neighbor that's a Marine, former Marine. No offense to Marines, of course, but he's probably the most dangerous guy. He's in his 20s. So
You and Don?
Don's a Hindu. Don's not
Oh,
going to
okay.
shoot
Okay, never
the place up. No, Don's not dangerous at all. But I have no social control. What controls me? Don's controlled by his religion, but I'm not. So I'm more dangerous than Don. Damn it, I'm more dangerous. Sociology focuses on group level variables, the status of the individual, the norms of the society, the social roles that people perform. Sometimes what everyone knows is pretty accurate. Sometimes it isn't. Usually, sometimes it's okay. Usually, how do we know how to act? You know, you go to the sub and you're having some kind of a convocation. How do you know how to act? Well, you sit down, you don't stand up and walk around, you don't talk. You know, we know how to react to these things. When you go to a ceremony, how do you react? You know to keep quiet, you know to be respectful, you know to follow the protocols, of course. Thank you. Yeah. But you know that. You know that because you've been to these before.
Repeated.
And if you have a white guy that's there and he's never been to one of these things, he doesn't have a clue about American Indians, he may be taking pictures and he may be talking really loud in the corner someplace. I don't know if you guys allow that. I'm sure that it would be a mess. But, you know, he would be fairly inappropriate because he has no clue what's going on. And then all of a sudden, you know, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, he says, "Man, I'm tired. Is this thing going to be over soon?" And somebody whispers in his ear, "This is a 9-day ceremony." He goes, "Really? Oh, shit, man, I got to get out of here." Isn't that what he does? You've never seen one of these guys?
I actually have.
Okay. No, he just doesn't know how to act. So sometimes everyone knows what's going on, and sometimes common knowledge is common knowledge, and sometimes it just doesn't work. Who would have predicted that Donald Trump would be president? I mean, he looked like a really bad candidate. I mean, he was.
What was that lady's name? She predicted.
Fiorina?
Real skinny, real thin, tall.
Fiorina was the lady that was running for the Republicans. And she predicted that he would be the president. He's profane, he attacks people, he gives everybody nicknames. What does he call Chuck Schumer? Oh, crying Chuck Schumer. He hasn't given Nancy Pelosi one yet, but I'm sure he will, and as soon as he does, the feminists are just going to jump all over him. He gives everybody a nickname. What did he call little Rubio, little Marco? That's what he called Marco Rubio. He gave everybody these horrible, horrible names, and they just stuck because people liked that. That we had, politics were just too sterile. Now all of a sudden we got Donald Trump, and he makes fun. He called the leader of North Korea Rocket Man because he was trying to develop rockets, so he called him Rocket Man. As funny as that is. So nobody could have predicted that Donald, well, there was a lady, I guess, a skinny lady, a slender young lady.
She's an author, I can't remember her name.
Wait a minute. She's a conservative author.
She's very, very far-right conservative.
Oh, God, she's so skinny she looks skeletal.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I do. I know who you're talking about.
I can't remember her name.
I can't think of her name either. Yeah, I can't think of her name. You can't tell the difference relying only on common sense, of course. Things change. Things change in the world. And things may, there's a television show on CNN about styles. I don't know if you remember when Michael Jackson put one glove on, one sparkly glove on, and then he started doing his dancing. He had one glove, one hand with no glove, and one hand with a glove, and he had on a leather coat that only came down to his waist. So all of a sudden, everybody started wearing those coats and one glove, as strange as that may seem. And it was, he created a style. But the first time you saw it, you went, oh, this is the dumbest thing in the world. Or, what was the hairstyle? Or they... Mullet. A mullet. Yeah, they cut their hair short along the sides, and then they had it was long in the back. I know.
Ann Coulter.
Ann Coulter, that's the lady's name. Yeah. We need Donald Trump. Social psychology uses science to find the most reliable rules about human thought, emotion, and behavior, and all of this changes. The reality is everything changes. So the rules that Gordon Allport wrote in the 1930s no longer apply in the United States. The rules that we could have written in the 1990s no longer apply in the United States. Stephen King, who was censured yesterday, wasn't actually censured, he was just condemned, I guess, or something. He was censured for saying positive things about white supremacy. 5 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. 10 years ago, well, it didn't happen because he was saying the same shit back then. But 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 20 years ago, when Clinton was president, Strom Thurmond, the senator from South Carolina, said, "You better not come down here. People don't like you down here. We're more conservative than that. You're too liberal. You're too positive about African Americans. We'll kill you down here." Now, you can't threaten the president to kill the president. You can't do that. But here was a senator from South Carolina, and he did that. When was the last lynching of a black person in the United States? Back in the 20s? Back in the 19... Oh, yeah. More recent. 1973. The guy the people that lynched him, what happened to him? Nothing. We've been trying to pass an anti-lynching law in the United States since the 1860s, since slavery went away, but we haven't been able to pass it, as strange as that may seem. even in today's society, we still don't have an anti-lynching law. And this was a really serious problem in the 1920s and 1930s. In Omaha, Nebraska in 1970, they had a race riot, and 3 African-American gentlemen were lynched in Omaha, Nebraska. It's kind of north, certainly not in the south. These kinds of things have been happening for a long time. And social psychologists, they try to figure out what the hell's going on. Vilhelm Votes argued for the development of social psychology in 1862. He set up the first psychological laboratory in Leipzig, Germany. The interesting thing about the fact that he was writing in 1862 was that there was no Germany in 1862. Germany wasn't established until 1871, but it was in the portion that would become Germany. Leipzig was in that area. Anyway, so Germany wasn't a country until 1871. Before that, it was a bunch of tiny little principalities. At one point, there were 500 of them in what is Germany today. So we had all these strange little princes and princesses and kings and queens and odd groups of royalty because they ran this little chunk of Germany. And that's one of the reasons why has anybody ever been to Germany? No, never? Okay. Germany has lots of castles, and that's the reason why, because they had their own little principalities. The first experiment that was ever done in social psychology was done by Norman Triplett from Indiana University in 1896. He tried to prove that when you're in competition, it increases your performance. This is known as social facilitation. What he did, he took a group of young people and he had them reeling up a fishing line. And he said, well, do it as fast as you can. And so they would do it, and he would time them reeling up this fishing line, and then he set them against each other. And what he discovered was, when they were in competition with somebody else, they went faster. And that's known as social facilitation. And that was Norman Triplett of Indiana University. There's Floyd. This is Gordon's brother. In 1924, Floyd actually was the one that started social psychology, he and his brother. But Floyd's the one that wrote the books. He's the one that started the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues, and that was in 1936. In 1924, Floyd Allport published an influential text on social psychology. Before this, of course, there was no social psychology. He said that we needed this. We need to study societies because there's a lot of strange things going on out there. We need to study these societies. Germany had lost World War I. And after World War I, between World War I and World War II, the German economy collapsed. And because of that, well, if your money's no good, what do? How do you live? If you live in the city, if you live in the country, of course, you can grow your own food. But if you live in the city, and Germany is very, well, remember there were 500 principalities, so each of these principalities became a city. So there's a lot of little bitty cities all over Germany. And there were a lot of people that lived in these cities. Not only that, but if you've ever been to Germany, it's really kind of a fascinating place. In the United States, if you have a farm, you live on the farm, right? Isn't that what you do? You live there so that, you can go out to the barn and feed the pigs and feed the cows. But in Germany, they don't do that. In Germany, they have their fields out of town, but they live in town. So every morning, you'll see the farmers wandering out to their fields. But they all lived in the city because once upon a time, if you were isolated, then somebody would raid you, they would steal all your food, they would steal all your money, rape your daughters and whatnot. So people lived in cities. They lived in fortified cities. Remember, there's 500 different principalities, and the guy next door might want your stuff. So everybody had to live in a secure location, and they still do that. They don't raise their livestock. They raise their livestock in their houses. So if you've got cows, then you've got the cows come in. The barn is actually the bottom floor of your house. If you have pigs, they're right there. The cows get to go out, the pigs don't. Yes, sir.
Hopis are real similar. Their cornfields are off.
Out there somewhere?
They all live together. And then the cornfields are off further out, and the ranches are.
I wonder if,
Navajos usually live closer to their cornfields.
oh, okay. Well, to protect them. I guess that makes sense. I wonder if Germans and Hopis are related. Probably not. Interesting.
I don't know if other pueblos do that,
Yeah. Well, I think they all did that, didn't they? I mean, they couldn't grow, everybody lived on top of each other, and they couldn't grow food there. Yeah, they had to, yeah, so they had to go out to their fields. And if somebody came to raid, they would all, they had a secure area, so and they'd all be in the secure area rather than out in the fields. And then they just let them take their produce or whatever. Makes sense. So what's going on? Society for the Psych. Oh, okay. So he's the one that established the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues, founded in 1936. 1936, a lot of stuff going on. Remember, Germany was their economy collapsed. Everything collapsed in Germany. And everybody lived in the city. So how in the world do you buy your food? How do you get food for your children? I mean, nothing is worth anything, right? Money's not worth anything. So how do you survive? Well, they didn't. It was a really serious problem. Millions of marks would not buy a loaf of bread. You could have a whole stack of bills, and it wasn't worth anything. They would burn it was worth more to burn that money than it was to try to use it as currency. So they had to barter everything. All of a sudden, they had the society totally broke down. The economy totally broke down, and they had to barter everything. Well, that's okay for a country person because country people are growing their own food. But what about the city people, the people that were shop owners? Well, you couldn't. So what did you barter? Well, if you had anything, you bartered that. And this went on for years. It was a really strange time. Sex became a commodity. And that was one of the only ways that they could survive, was by selling themselves, by selling their relatives and whatnot. It was a really ugly time. And it was a time that they referred to as anime. Anime is the word that they use for the total breakdown of society. I have friends who are anarchists. The big A with the circle around it. Anarchists. And they claim that, I can take care of myself. I got a gun. I'm bigger and stronger and meaner than anybody else. I'll be okay. So they think the government should go away completely and that they can take care of themselves. People are naturally good. So anarchists believe that they can do that. Well, they tried that in Germany between the two world wars, and it didn't work at all. There were murders in the street. There were all kinds of horrible things that were taking place. So this is in the 1920s, and then in 1929, the world economy just collapsed. There wasn't just a depression in the United States, there was a depression everywhere. China just had a recession, and when China had a recession, our stock market just tanked. So we are controlled by the rest of the economy. All the economies in the world are tied together. And that's one of the things that happened in 1929. They all collapsed at the same time. So it wasn't just in the United States where we had 1/4 of our people that weren't working, it was all over the world. And that's when social psychology became very, very important. What's going to happen next? If you have a police force and you're not paying them, do you have a police force? Or do they become, I don't know, demagogues? Do they become a power unto themselves and start bullying people around? Or maybe they're doing that now. That's what social psychology is all about. Okay. And this was happening all over the world. So these guys were looking at this and saying, wow, look what's going on in France. Look what's going on in Spain. Look what's going on in Germany. It looked really bad for Germany. There were all kinds of horrible things that were taking place. And then a very conservative individual came to power, and he decided he was going to control all aspects of society. And this man's name was Adolf Hitler. So there were a lot of people that thought Hitler was a good guy because he saved the country. The country was falling apart, and he went in and he saved the country. So there were a lot of guys, a lot of people around the world were going, okay, good job, Adolf. This is good. Your country was actually being destroyed. And this became known as fascism. He wasn't the first one. The first one was a guy in Italy by the name of Mussolini, and he came into power in 1923. He came into power in 1923. Hitler came into power in 1932. But Mussolini started it in Italy. Italy was falling apart, and he came in and he saved the country. Centralized government. He referred to it as fascism. And of course, Hitler thought that was a pretty good idea. Hitler copied that in Germany, but one of the problems in Germany, of course, was that they had just lost World War I and they weren't allowed to arm themselves. And he said, this isn't right. We've got France on our southern border. We've got Russia we've got the crazy communists to our east. We need to be able to arm ourselves. So he did. He broke the law. The law told him he couldn't arm, and he did. And then in 1936, of course, Franco took over in Spain. So we had these fascist movements going on all over the world. And some people thought it was a good idea, and some people thought it was a bad idea. Social psychologists were the ones that needed to decide whether this was a good idea or a bad idea. One of the precepts of social psychology is Gestalt. Gestalt is a German word, and it comes from three German scientists, Kurt Kafka, Max Wertheimer, and Wolfgang Köhler. These guys fought in World War I. Actually, they didn't fight in World War I. The Canary Islands are in the Atlantic Ocean. They're between Europe and Africa. They're off the coast of Africa. Anyway, they were isolated on one of these islands, and they had all of these monkeys, and they were doing experiments with the monkeys. And they discovered that sometimes you have ideas that aren't complete ideas, but they're good ideas. So sometimes you can take little pieces of ideas, stick them together, and you've got one great idea, and that's what Gestalt is. Sometimes you don't have all of the pieces of the puzzle, but you can still see what that puzzle is going to be. You don't need all the pieces. And that's what Gestalt is all about. That's how brilliance starts. You have little pieces of ideas and you stick them together and you come up with one brilliant idea. Gestalt emphasizes that the mind actively organizes stimuli into meaningful wholes. Gestalt sees the social environment not only made up of individuals, but also relations between individuals, relationships that have important psychological implications. So one of the important psychological implications, one of the important relationships for you is probably your friends from high school, I'm assuming. Does everybody have friends from high school? Do you still communicate with those people? You don't have any friends? Neither do I. Emery's the only friend I've got. He's leaving me, so. But so we have friends. We have relationships with other individuals. I'm from Iowa. I don't have any friends in Iowa, but I have friends here. This is kind of interesting. But I have a wife back in Iowa who's coming to visit me on next Friday, a week from this Friday. I'm so excited. My wife's coming to visit. So we have these relationships, and they make up who we are, these relationships. You've got a relationship with your family. You've got relationships with your friends from high school. Potentially you have adult relationships with potentially romantic others. So all of these make up who you are. Maybe you've seen movies where a guy's got all these friends from high school, and all of a sudden he meets a girl, and the girl, and he stops paying attention to his friends. Have you ever seen a movie like that? Does that really happen in real life? Is that the way it works? You find somebody that's more interesting than those bums from high school, that's usually the way it works. And maybe this person likes you for a certain aspect of who you are, so you actually change for that person. You start acting differently. My wife talked me into getting I already had a master's degree, but she talked me into getting a PhD. That was her idea. If I had been with anybody else. Actually, my first wife was jealous that I was going to school. She thought I was trolling around for a girlfriend. I know. Wives, what are you going to do with them? She was jealous, and not only that, but she was jealous that I was getting an education and she wasn't. And I told her, well, go to school. Yeah. She didn't do that. She would rather go out and party. So she left me because I'm not a party person. I'm boring. You guys are going to find out how boring I am, as sad as that may seem.
You don't even have to be married to experience that.
To be boring?
No, to actually go through what you're talking about
Yeah,
with your ex.
that's true. That's true. You are correct. I did. This is back in the 1960s, so yeah, well, you had to be married to experience all that stuff.
So it's actually a ancient thing for people to be that way, huh? Wow.
Oh, the world's such a weird place. Gestalt saw groups as social entities that led to the tradition of group processes and group dynamics. And we're going to talk about group dynamics because this is very important. The organizations that you belong to sometimes identify you, and sometimes they change your behavior, as curious as that is. So if you're a member of the NRA, then you act like a member of the NRA. You always say that guns are good, and you never say that guns are bad. That's being a member of the NRA, and I'm not saying anything negative about members of the NRA. I'm just using that as an example. Carl was a Navy SEAL. After he got out of the Navy, he confronted his sexuality and joined a local gay group in San Diego. Before Carl joined the group, they would just sit around in a bar and complain about how they were treated in the community. They weren't treated very well because they were gay. After Carl joined the group, the members were more willing to admit their sexuality and they became more socially active. Just because of Carl. Carl changed the group dynamic because Carl was a big, tough Navy SEAL. Not because he beat anybody up that said anything negative about gay people, but because he gave them courage. He changed the dynamic. They changed their personalities. Maybe this is who they wanted to be, but they didn't have an icon to look up to. So the group dynamic changed just because of one individual. And it wasn't because he was the leader, it was just because of who he was. We see this in sports teams. You add one individual to a team, and all of a sudden, because of his personality, the team completely changes and they win the World Series. Or I'm talking about a baseball team. Or they win the Super Bowl. Just because of one guy. Really? Could that possibly happen? Well, it looks like it might happen with Kansas City. Kansas City hasn't had a winning team. Well, they haven't won their division for a really, really long time. And here they're playing for the AFC Championship, Kansas City, because of their quarterback. He's a good quarterback, but one guy cannot win a Super Bowl. So we'll see what happens. But he changed the team dynamic. He made everybody better because of who he is and because of his attitude and because of his skills. He changed the team dynamic. And we see this with other teams, especially in football. Tom Brady with the Patriots. Have the Patriots really been that dominant? If we take Tom Brady out, do they still win? And the answer is probably not. Peyton Manning won with Denver and he won with Indianapolis. Was it because he was that good a quarterback? Was he that good a passer? Or was it just the dynamic of who he was? He made everybody else feel better about themselves, and they played better with him. After World War II, social psychology blossomed as research sought answers to problems of the day. Theodore Adorno and Stanley Milgram had influential research programs searching to explain Nazi atrocities. The truth is that the Allies knew that there was something going on. They knew that they were probably exterminating people. They probably didn't realize that it was on such a massive scale. There were extermination camps all over Poland. There were extermination camps in Eastern Germany. There were extermination camps in Czechoslovakia. They knew that they existed, but they weren't exactly sure what they were. So after the war, and actually, this is kind of a family story. Actually, my dad was in World War II, and his unit liberated one of the extermination camps. So here's all these starving people that haven't been exterminated yet. They were the workers at the camp. And they were starving to death. And I don't know if you've ever seen somebody who's starving to death, but they look fairly skeletal. So what would you do if you saw if you saw a dog that was starving to death? You'd feed it, of course. And that's what they tried to do with these guys, but you can't do that. Humans have a fairly delicate digestive system. If you haven't eaten anything in a long time, you can't give them something very rich. It will shock the system and they die. So this is what my dad had to do. He was in charge of this unit, and they had just liberated, actually his unit was a unit that came in behind the unit that actually liberated the camp. But they liberated the camp, and then they kept chasing, or they kept moving on, and his unit was the one that had to take control of the camp. So he went in there with his people, and the first thing they tried to do was what you would do, you want to feed them. Well, what did they have to feed them? They had K rations, and K rations are supposed to keep you alive in the field, so they're fairly rich. They've got lots of protein in it, lots of calories, so that you can take a bite, and now you've got enough food for 12 hours of fighting or whatever. So they tried to do that. They tried to feed this stuff, and of course my mom is a nurse, so my dad had an idea that this isn't going to work. So when they fed the first couple people, they got sick and died. So my dad had to order his unit not to feed them. They had to wait until the medics came up so that they could figure out the formula of food that they could actually feed them. And what they had to feed them was a really thin broth. It was almost water with a little bit of nutrients in it. And then they added a little bit more protein, and eventually they were able to save some of these people. But if they fed them all K rations, they would have died. They would have all died. And so my dad had to pull out his service 45 and order his men not to feed the people. And that was tough. That was really, really tough. So there were a lot of really strange things going on in World War II. The Germans were torturing and exterminating whole masses of people, not just the Jewish population, but also the gay population and anybody with any disabilities. They wanted to get rid of bad genes, so they destroyed all of these people. Anybody with a mental illness was exterminated. They wiped out all the homosexuals in Germany. And in France, of course, which was a little interesting because the gay community was one of the communities that helped Hitler gain power. So a lot of his lieutenants were gay, as strange as that was. So through the years, as time went on, he would get rid of this guy, then he'd get rid of that guy. Eventually, by the end of the war, he didn't have any lieutenants who were gay, or that he admitted were gay. Anyway, it was really kind of interesting. So Nazi atrocities, just nobody could figure out how in the world, why would they do this? Why would you exterminate a whole group of people? Why would you try to kill off all the gypsies? Why would you try to kill off all the Jews? Why would you do that? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Genocide doesn't make any sense, especially in a place like Germany. Germany, remember, they had 500 different principalities. Everybody and their cousin had walked through there and left a little package. Had left children behind. Soldiers, when they go into areas, sometimes they have sex with the people that are there. And this had happened in Germany. So these people were probably the most mixed up people in the whole wide world. The Polish people had come through, the Russians had come through, the Swedes had come down from Scandinavia. Everybody had marched through Germany. The Romans had come up from the south. The French had conquered them several times. So everybody's leaving little packages. Everybody's mixed up. So here they are, they're killing people because they were Jewish or Gypsy or whatever. And it just didn't make any sense. So after the war, we tried to figure this out. After the war, we pretended we had no idea what was going on. During World War II, there were a lot of strange things that happened. The French resistance fought the Nazis in France, tried to liberate France, and one of the groups that was exterminated in France were the communists, these French resistance fighters. And they were one of the most successful of all the resistance groups, but the French allowed them to be exterminated by the Germans. They actually told the Germans where they were so that they would attack them. And then they were wiped out. Not to a man, of course. So politics could change the way that people reacted. And nobody understood why this was going on. These are people, right? Why in the world would they exterminate anybody?
Poverty and politics, right?
Poverty and politics. So Stanley Milgram tried to figure this out. They said that the reason we killed people was because we were ordered to. Well, we've been in that situation. We killed people that we were told to kill. We've been in that situation before. Is that a good reason? Do people really do that? If you think that this is a bad idea, do you still do it? If somebody orders you to shoot a child, do you shoot a child? I know that's a tough one, but of course, in some circumstances, that child is wired to explode, and you can't let them get into your compound. So, anyway. So the idea was, how do we do this? Why would we do this? And Stanley Milgram came up with an experiment. He brought two people in, and he told them it was an educational experiment. So he brought two people in, and he told them, one of you is going to be the teacher, the other of you will be the learner. And the instrument that he used was an electric panel. The best way to learn is to punish people if they don't learn. So what I want you to do, if he gets the answer wrong, I want you to shock him. Okay. So they had the teacher in one room, they had the learner in the next room, and he'd ask him a question, and if he got it wrong, he would electrocute him. And of course, the panel that he had, the voltage went up as the more questions he missed, the stronger the shock. He was trying to teach this guy how to, he's trying to teach him. And electric shock is the best way to teach people. But unfortunately, the learner was dumb. And the learner got lots of things wrong. So all of a sudden, he's shocking this guy, and he's shocking him, and he's screaming on the other side of the panel. He's screaming, don't do that. This is terrible. I want to quit. You can't quit. You have to keep going. So, and he did. And there was a guy standing right there. No, please continue. No, please continue. And he shocked him to the point that it would have killed him. There's a big red X on there that said, this is too dangerous. If you shock them up to this point, you may kill that person. 2/3 of the people that did it shocked that guy to the point that they would have killed him. They followed what they were instructed to do. They were obedient to authority. And that's what Milgram was trying to prove. He's trying to prove that people really will do stupid things. They really will do what they're told. 2/3 of them will. And the first people that he did the experiment on were men. So then he decided he was going to do the experiment with women to see if they would do the same thing. Women are sugar and spice and everything nice. Women are sweet and nice, and they cuddle their babies, right? So women wouldn't do that, would they? Would they? Are women obedient? Are they?
No.
No.
Not all of them.
Not on the res.
Not on the way. Well, he didn't do it. He didn't do it here. He did it up in Massachusetts. Actually did it in Connecticut. So, what do you think the results were for the women? Men, 2/3 of them were obedient, and they did what they were told. Shocked and ran. How about the women? Exactly the same result. Exactly the same result. 2/3 of them shocked that person to the point of death. They did another experiment. This is later on. They were working with nurses. They took 22 nurses and they gave them an order to give a patient a shot that they knew would kill the patient. It was a lethal dose of a select medication. 22 nurses. Guess how many of them gave the guy the shot?
Oh.
Close, 21 out of 22. They're obedient. We are humans, we are obedient. This is how we learn to live in society. So this is the social psychology experiments that we're talking about. This is really important stuff. Because we've got all kinds of crazy stuff on the internet. Are we going to do what we're told on the internet? I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. You go on Facebook, and off to the right is all kinds of propaganda. Who knows where the hell it comes from? Maybe it comes from Russia. Now we find out that some of it comes from Russia. They're trying to tell us what to do. They're trying to tap us. They're trying to get us to do what they want us to do. And that's what happened in the last election. Or not the last election, the 2016 election. There were a lot of individuals that said something to. And they believed what they read. And they did what they were told because we are humans and we are obedient. So by golly, we need to stay on top of this stuff. That's one of the reasons why the Mueller investigation is going to be so important. Oh, I would never do what the Russians told me to do. Well, the hell you wouldn't. You voted for Donald Trump and they told you to vote for Donald Trump. We are obedient people, so we need to stay on top of this. Good stuff.
No, I'm not gonna do my research paper.
On Milgram?
No, I'm not gonna do that.
Because I told you to? That's good. So we were trying to figure out why white people were so obedient. But the reality is, of course, we had millions of men in uniform and they were all doing what they were told to do. So they were all obedient as well. Would they have tried to exterminate the Jews and the gypsies and the gay people and the evangelical Christians? They had a lot of people they picked on. Unfortunately, we react to propaganda a lot. I can remember when during the Cold War, you weren't in the military during the Cold War.
I was right after.
Yeah, the wall went down in 1989. But I was in the military during the Cold War, and they used to call the communists godless communists. Godless. However, if you look at Red Square, it's surrounded by churches. Well, it's Russian Orthodox, but it's still Orthodox. It's surrounded by churches, and there were a lot of Russians that are very religious people, extremely religious people. They're Orthodox. So here we were victims of propaganda, if you believe the fact that they said that the Russians were godless. Communists are all godless, because that's one of the things Marx said. But if we look at places where communism has been very strong, Cuba. So is Cuba a religious country? It's been communist since 1959. Is it? It's very Catholic. It's a very Catholic country. So a lot of this stuff is propaganda. Leon Festinger developed a theory of cognitive dissonance, trying to explain how Germans could ignore the obvious. They knew that these people were going into these camps, and they didn't know what happened to all those people. You know, thousands and thousands of people are going into the camps, and they're just disappearing. Are Germans so stupid that they don't understand what's happening to them in the camps? Can they not put two and two together? Or did they not want to put two and two together? And the answer was they didn't want to put two and two together because they were practicing cognitive dissonance. I don't know, we need to do something about the Jews. We're sending them to the camps, and then they don't think about what happens next. Even though they could smell, I don't know if you've ever smelled burning bodies, but it's not the most pleasant smell in the world. They had this very odd odor all over Czechoslovakia and Germany and Poland. Kenneth Clark and Mamie Phipps Clark studied effects of segregation on the self-concept of black children. For the longest time, there was a law in the United States that we can have separate but equal education. And this was intact until the 1950s, that any education is equal education. So despite the fact that the black schools don't have the same textbooks, that they don't have very well-trained teachers, all education is okay. So segregated education was good. Any education is good. Any education is equal, separate but equal. So that was the law of the land in the United States until 1956. But it didn't change things, and it still hasn't changed things. Has anybody been to the South lately? I used to live in Mississippi. This is in the 90s, so things may have changed. No, they haven't. So they ordered the people in the South, the school districts in the South, to integrate. So what happened to all those? We had all these black kids, we had all these white kids. The white parents didn't want their children to be educated in black schools with black children. They're too dangerous. They're different. Them guys is different. So what did they do? If you wander around the South, they have integrated schools. Not all their schools are integrated, though. As a matter of fact, most of them aren't. What you have is you have public schools where almost all the black kids go, and you have private schools where almost all the white kids go. I lived in a county that had 70%, that was 70% white and 30% black. The high school was 90% black, and the academy right next door was almost 100% white. So what they did, they started this concept of private education, of Christian education. They couched it in religion, and they were able to re-segregate education in the South. I'm not saying anything negative about Christian education, but what I'm saying is they used it in the South to re-segregate the schools, and that's the way it is now. As sad as that is. So Kenneth Clark and Mamie Phipps Clark were looking at segregation and how it affects people.
They still do that.
They still do that.
There was a court case recently in Utah. They redrew the boundaries to cut the Navajo reservation off, so that the Navajo students couldn't go to the schools up in Utah. And they cut off a lot of the funding for buses for the Navajo, for sliding on the Navajo, so that the county wouldn't have to let their tax money go to pay for student Navajo students.
White people don't want to pay for anybody's education.
It happened to Gestalt too, about 10 years ago. The county wouldn't pay for busing onto the reservation.
This is sad stuff. Let me see what time it is. Is it time? Oh my God, it's time. You guys need to go. I'm sorry. I know I start preaching and I